The canyon was silent except for the steady crunch of gravel beneath Chayton's moccasins. He had been riding hard all morning, chasing the faint trail of deer tracks that would feed his people. But when the sun rose higher, he let the hunt drift behind him. Hunger could wait. The world was whispering of something else. The land around him was not unfamiliar, yet it carried a strangeness that made the hairs on his neck prickle. The rocks here were jagged and red, sculpted into cruel shapes by the wind. Shadows stretched long in the crevices, hiding secrets. Ravens circled far above, their black wings sharp against the pale sky, and each cry they made seemed to echo 3 times, as though the canyon itself was mocking him. Chayton was not a man easily unsettled. He had faced enemies who outnumbered him 10 to 1, crossed deserts that swallowed lesser men whole. He was Apache, born of warriors who could move like ghosts through the mountains. But as he stepped deeper into the canyon's throat, he felt the press of silence against his ears, a silence that carried weight. It was not the stillness of peace, it was the pause of something. Waiting. His hand rested on the haft of his lance as he descended a narrow slope. The ground here was loose, a scatter of shale and sand, and more than once his foot skidded. When he reached the bottom, the air was cooler, trapped between the high stone walls. That was when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as the wind. A voice. He froze, his breath caught. It was not the cry of an animal or the rumble of stone shifting. It was human, ragged, and close. Slowly, he scanned the canyon floor. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, found movement near the bend where the rock curved inward. At first he thought it was only a heap of brush, broken branches tangled together. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved into something else entirely, a body, a woman. She lay half buried beneath a fallen branch thick as a man's arm, her skin pale against the rust-red earth. Her hair, tangled with leaves, fanned out across the stones. Her chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. She was alive. Chayton approached cautiously, crouching low. There were many reasons a woman might be in such a place, none of them simple. Could this be a trap? The Apache had enemies, soldiers, settlers, rival tribes who would use any trick to weaken him. Yet when he looked at her face, he saw no deceit. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and wet with pain, and they met his with a pleading that pierced through all suspicion. Her lips moved, cracked and dry. At first the words were a whisper, broken by gasps. Chayton leaned closer, straining to catch them. Please. Don't. Her hand, trembling like a leaf in the wind, lifted a few inches from the ground and pointed weakly to the branch across her leg. Her voice cracked again, sharp with desperation. Don't pull it. The words made no sense. Chayton frowned, glancing down at the branch. It had fallen from the canyon wall, crushing her thigh beneath its weight. Blood had pooled darkly in the dirt. Any man would have assumed the same as he, that the only hope she had was for him to free her, to pull the branch away and lift her clear. Yet she begged him not to. Water, she rasped suddenly, her throat raw. He slid the skin from his shoulder and held it to her lips. She drank greedily, drops spilling down her chin before pushing it weakly away. Again her eyes locked on his, fierce despite the pain. You mustn't, she whispered. Don't pull it, please. The warrior's brows knit. He had seen men caught beneath fallen horses, crushed by boulders, even pinned by the shafts of their enemies' spears. Always, the instinct was the same: free them, release them, save them. This warning was not natural. Chay rose to his full height and surveyed the canyon walls, searching for others. Perhaps she feared the branch was part of a trap, rigged with hidden snares. But he saw nothing, no rope, no sign of cunning hands. Only her, broken and trembling, his chest tightened. Somewhere deep inside, instinct warred with honor. The Apache did not abandon the helpless, not even strangers, not even enemies, if the Great Spirit placed them in his path. Yet something in her eyes, in the way she begged him with every ounce of strength left in her body, made him pause. Her voice cracked one last time, softer, almost a sob. "Don't pull it." And then her head sank back, her breath shallow, her skin pale as bone. Chayton stood over her in the still canyon, torn between the code he had always lived by and the chill that gnawed at his heart. He did not understand her warning. Not yet. But the silence that followed was heavier than before, pressing down upon him. As if the canyon itself was waiting to see what he would do, Chayton knelt again, the weight of the woman's words clinging to him like a shadow. Her voice was hoarse, weak, but the urgency in it was unmistakable. She was not simply afraid, she was terrified. Terrified not of dying, not of the pain, but of what might happen if he pulled away the branch. He studied her more closely now. Dirt smeared her face, but beneath it her features were delicate cheekbones sharp, lips pale, eyes the strange color of river water after rain. She looked neither soldier nor settler, neither Apache nor any tribe he knew. Her clothing was torn, though not like those shredded by an animal's claws. The rips were straight, deliberate, as if she had fought something or someone. Her hands trembled as they pressed against the earth. Not with weakness alone. No, her fear was rooted deeper than that. Why? Chayton asked, his voice low, steady as the canyon stone. Why not pull it? You will die here. Her eyes flared, glassy and frantic. She shook her head, strands of hair sticking to her sweat-streaked face. Her lips moved again, and he leaned close, straining to hear above the silence that pressed on them both. It keeps it in. The words struck him harder than any arrow. He pulled back slightly, frowning. Keeps what in? He demanded. She swallowed, her throat bobbing like she was trying to force down a stone. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "The dark." For a moment, Chayton wondered if her mind had broken under the weight of suffering. Perhaps she spoke in riddles because pain had stolen her reason. Yet there was no madness in her eyes, only the raw edge of desperation. Her hand reached again toward his, startlingly quick despite her frailty. Fingers cold as river stones gripped his wrist with surprising strength. She pulled him closer, her breath shallow but insistent. "If you pull it," she whispered, "I cannot stop it. It will come out." Chayton's stomach tightened. He had heard tales told by firelight, tales of spirits bound by earth and stone, of curses that clung to the blood of men. Old women spoke of such things to frighten children into obedience. He had dismissed them often, laughing with his brothers around the fire. Yet now, with her eyes burning into his and her grip shaking his wrist, the memory of those stories stirred uneasily in his chest. Still, he was not a man of fear. Fear clouded judgment. Fear led to mistakes. And in his world, mistakes killed. "You are wounded," he said firmly. "The branch must come off, or you will bleed to death." Her nails dug into his skin. The desperation in her voice rose like the wail of a mourning mother. "No!" she cried, her body shaking. "Don't you understand? It's not holding me down, it's holding it down." The words echoed against the canyon walls, carried by the empty air. Even the ravens above had grown quiet. Chayton's eyes narrowed. He glanced at the branch again. It lay heavy across her thigh, bark splintered, wood twisted from the fall. The flesh beneath was torn and swollen, but not crushed as badly as he had thought. It was possible, just possible, that she lived only because the weight pressed against the wound, stanching the bleeding. Perhaps that was what she meant. Perhaps she feared bleeding out if it was moved, but something in her tone told him it was more than that. Much more. Her grip faltered. Exhaustion was pulling her back down into the earth. She released his wrist, her arm dropping lifelessly to her side. Her breath rattled, shallow and uneven. Still, her lips moved, and he leaned close once more. "Please," she begged, the word breaking like dried twigs. "Don't pull it." Her eyes, those river water eyes, pleaded with him, shimmering with both pain and a strange, resigned knowledge. As though she had already seen what would happen if he ignored her. As though she carried the memory of something unspeakable, Chayton sat back on his heels, torn in two directions. His training, his honor, his very blood told him to free her. That was what men of his people did. To walk away was cowardice. To hesitate was shame. And yet, as he looked at her pale face in the shadow of the canyon, a creeping chill slid down his spine. It wasn't her injury that unsettled him. It was her certainty. Her plea was not the whimpering of a dying woman. It was the command of someone who knew a terrible truth. The warrior felt his heart thud heavy in his chest. And for the first time in many seasons, Chayton realized he did not know what the right choice was. Above, a raven screamed once and flew off, black wings slicing the sky. The sound lingered long after the bird was gone. Chayton did not move for a long while. He crouched by the wounded woman, one hand resting on the earth, the other on the haft of his lance, as if bracing himself against the canyon itself. The branch across her thigh looked ordinary, a fallen limb like any other, stripped of leaves, bark cracked with dryness. But her plea clung to him like smoke, seeping into his thoughts, choking out certainty. He had been raised to act without hesitation. Doubt was a luxury men could not afford on the hunt, in war, or in the harsh breath of the desert. A single pause could mean the difference between life and death. Yet here he was frozen, staring at a broken woman who begged him to do the very opposite of what instinct demanded. Her words repeated in his mind, each time louder. "Don't pull it." The Apache's dark eyes shifted to her face again. She had slipped into a half-conscious daze, eyelids fluttering, lips parting in shallow breaths. Her body trembled faintly, not with the weakness of blood loss alone, but as though she were holding back something inside herself. Chayton's jaw tightened. He could not let superstition cloud him. He was no child to cower at stories whispered by the old ones. Yet even as he thought it, the weight in his chest deepened. He remembered the way her voice had cracked with desperation, the way her grip had bitten into his skin with surprising strength. Not a plea for her life, but a plea for something greater. He rose to his feet, scanning the canyon walls again, forcing himself into the habit of caution. If there was trickery here, he would not be fooled. The rocks were silent, the shadows empty. Only the faint scrape of a lizard on stone broke the stillness. No ambush, no snare. No sign of men waiting with rifles or bows, and yet something was waiting. He could feel it. His people believed the land itself held spirits, both good and ill. He had seen enough to know that some places carried a weight, a memory older than men. The canyon pressed in on him now, silent and watchful. The air felt thicker than it should, as though it carried more than wind. He turned back to the woman. Her arm twitched, fingers flexing as though she reached for something unseen. A faint moan escaped her lips, and she stirred, eyes half opening again. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible, but the words were clear enough. It will take you too." Chayton crouched beside her once more. "What will?" he demanded, keeping his tone sharp, commanding. "Speak plainly, woman. What lies beneath that branch?" Her gaze shifted toward him, unfocused but steady, as though she looked through him rather than at him. "Darkness," she breathed. "It's waiting. Always waiting. The branch. It pins it down. If you lift it—" Her voice broke and tears slipped down her dust-streaked cheeks. He felt the chill deepen, though the sun still burned on the canyon rim above. He wanted to dismiss it as delirium, the ravings of a wounded mind. Yet part of him, the part that listened to the whispers of the earth, the part that had kept him alive where others had fallen, could not. Could it be true? Could a fallen branch, ordinary as it seemed, serve as a seal, a barrier against something unseen? The thought was absurd, yet the unease in his chest said otherwise. For the first time in many years, Chayton found himself caught in two worlds. One, the world of flesh and stone and blood, where wounds must be treated and people saved. The other, the unseen world his people spoke of in hushed tones, where spirits walked in darkness had shape. His father's words came back to him, spoken long ago at a fire. The strongest warrior is not the one who never doubts, but the one who does not let doubt master him. But what if doubt was the only thing keeping him alive? Chayton exhaled slowly. His instinct told him to act. His honor demanded it. Yet every time he reached for the branch, the memory of her eyes stopped him cold. He could not shake the feeling that if he ignored her plea, he would unleash something he could never put back. The woman stirred again, her lips forming words he almost didn't hear. Please. Listen, not for me. For you? Her head fell to the side, breath ragged. The Apache warrior remained frozen, hand hovering just above the branch, sweat beating along his brow though the air was cool. His heart thudded in his chest, not from fear of battle, but from the strange, invisible war raging within him. For the first time in his life, Chayton did not know if saving someone might mean destroying everything. And so he hesitated. The canyon held its breath with him. The sun had crept higher, spilling light into the canyon, but no warmth touched Chayton. He knelt in that hollow of stone in silence, staring at the woman, at the branch pinning her down, at the dirt stained with her blood. Every muscle in his body ached with the weight of indecision. Apache warriors were taught to move like the wind swift, certain, never lingering in uncertainty. Yet here he was, crouched like a hunter unsure whether the shadow before him was prey or predator. The woman's breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of her chest a fragile thing, as if life itself balanced on the edge of breaking. He had given her water, but it had done little to restore her. Time was slipping through his fingers, and if he hesitated longer, her spirit might leave her body before the sun reached its height. Chayton's fingers brushed the haft of his lance again, grounding himself. This was not the way of the Apache, to stand still, to wait for answers that never came. Action was the measure of a man. A warrior who waits too long will die waiting. His father's words echoed like a drumbeat in his skull. And yet the woman's plea haunted him. Please, don't pull it. He looked again at the branch. It was ordinary wood, cracked where it had fallen from the canyon wall above. The way it pressed across her thigh, it could indeed be holding back the bleeding, acting as a crude tourniquet. If he moved it carelessly, the wound might tear wider, and she could bleed out before he could bind it. That, he told himself, was all she had meant, but another part of him whispered otherwise. A deeper, quieter voice, born not of logic but of instinct. It told him she had spoken the truth in her own way, that something more than flesh and blood was trapped there. His hand hovered over the branch, calloused fingers brushing the rough bark. The wood was cool under his skin, ordinary to the touch. Yet his heart hammered faster, each beat heavier than the last. He pulled his hand back sharply, rising to his feet. His eyes swept the canyon again, searching for signs, omens, movements, anything. But the world remained silent. No wind stirred. The ravens had gone. Even the lizard that had scraped across the stones was nowhere to be seen. The silence was suffocating. Chayton clenched his jaw. He would not let shadows rule him. He was Apache. He had killed men who carried rifles, faced storms that swallowed others whole. Fear was an enemy, and he would master it. He dropped to his knees once more, determination burning hot in his chest. If this woman was to die, it would not be while he stood idle. "Forgive me," he muttered, though whether to her or to the spirits, he did not no doubt. With both hands he gripped the branch. His muscles flexed, cords standing out in his arms. The bark bit into his palms, rough and stubborn. He braced himself, set his feet against the earth, and heaved. The branch shifted with a crackling groan, dust scattering from where it had pressed against the ground. The woman's body jolted, her back arching sharply, and a strangled cry burst from her throat. Her hands clawed at the dirt, fingers digging into the soil as though to anchor herself. "Please!" she gasped, voice breaking into a scream. "Don't!" But Chayton had already committed. He dragged the branch upward, throwing it aside. It struck the rocks with a hollow thud and rolled to a stop. For an instant, everything was still. The woman's chest heaved, her eyes wide, her mouth stretched open in a silent cry. Blood spilled from her thigh, but it was wrong thicker than blood should be, darker, as if shadows themselves were seeping from the wound. Chayton staggered back, his breath caught in his throat. The chill he had felt before now sank into his bones. This was no ordinary injury. The woman turned her face toward him, tears streaking her cheeks, her voice ragged and broken but filled with raw truth. "You shouldn't have pulled it." Her body convulsed violently, as though something inside her fought to break free. The air around them seemed to thrum, heavy, alive with an unseen force. Chayton's hands tightened on his lance. His heart pounded, colder now than any battle he had ever faced, because he knew whatever he had just released into the world, it was no enemy he had ever been trained to fight. For a moment after the branch rolled away, Chayton almost believed nothing had changed. The canyon held its breath, the woman lay trembling, and the silence hung heavy as before. He thought perhaps her wild words had been born of fever. Perhaps the wound only looked worse than it was, but then the air shifted. It began as a low vibration under his feet. Faint at first, like the tremor of a distant herd. Dust trickled from the canyon wall, scattering into the shaft of sunlight above. Chayton's head snapped upward, every sense sharpened, but no herd came. The vibration was not outside, it was inside. Inside the woman, her body arched again, a cry tearing from her throat. Chayton had heard many screams in his life of warriors pierced by arrows, of horses broken under weight, of mothers clutching dead children. But this sound was unlike them all. It was layered, as though a dozen voices had broken through her throat at once, each one shrieking in a different tongue. The wound on her thigh pulsed. Where the branch had pressed, flesh should have been torn, blood spilling freely. Instead, what oozed from the wound was thick, black, and writhing. Not liquid, not truly. It moved as if alive, dragging itself outward in slow, deliberate coils. Glistening like tar, Chayton stumbled back, one hand tightening on his lance, the other rising instinctively in a warding gesture his grandmother had taught him in childhood. His breath clouded in front of him, though the canyon air was warm. A deep, unnatural cold poured from the wound, crawling along the ground like mist. The woman thrashed, her fingernails gouging the earth, leaving bloody crescents in the dirt. Her eyes rolled white, then snapped back, irises glowing faintly with a sickly sheen. She gasped between screams, trying to speak. "I told you, don't?" Her voice cracked, breaking into another chorus of screams. The black ichor surged upward now, climbing her leg, spreading across her skin in spidery veins. It pulsed as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Chayton's blood ran cold. This was no wound he could bind, no poison he could draw out. This was something far older, something not of flesh. He felt it in the marrow of his bones. He had broken a seal. The branch had not been mere wood, it had been a stake driven by fate itself. A stopper wedged into the earth to hold back this corruption, and he and his stubbornness had pulled it free. The ichor swelled suddenly, surging upward toward the woman's chest. She convulsed so violently her body lifted from the ground. Her mouth opened wide, unnaturally wide, and from it poured a guttural howl that did not belong to her. The sound was deep, resonant, filled with a hunger that clawed at Chayton's ears and threatened to split his skull. Shadows lengthened across the canyon floor, bending unnaturally toward her body as if drawn to the corruption. The sunlight above seemed to dim. Though no cloud crossed the sky, Chayton's instinct screamed at him to flee, to abandon this cursed place, to let the darkness claim her and escape with his life. Yet his feet rooted him to the ground. He was Apache. He did not run from spirits, he faced them. Even when every part of him longed to turn and vanish into the desert, he gripped his lance tighter and planted it into the soil before him. The woman's body sagged suddenly, collapsing back into the dirt, but the thing inside her did not retreat. It was out now. Black tendrils seeped from her wound, dragging themselves across the ground toward him. They moved with purpose, like the limbs of some blind creature sniffing its way toward prey. Her head lolled to the side, her river-water eyes locking on his. Through cracked lips, she spoke again, voice raw, faint, but carrying the weight of truth. You freed it. Tears streaked her face. She had begged him, and he had not listened. Now she was little more than a shell, and what stirred inside her was not human. Chayton raised his lance, his heart hammering like a drum in his chest. But even as he braced himself, he knew this was no ordinary fight. Spears and arrows could pierce flesh, but this was no creature of flesh. The first tendril reached his boot, brushing the leather. Cold seared through it, up into his leg, sharp as ice, sinking into his very blood. His breath caught, and a chill spread into his chest. The Apache warrior had fought many enemies, but as the black ichor slithered forward, he realized none of those battles had prepared him for this. For the first time in his life, Chayton wondered if he had not stumbled into a canyon of earth and stone, but into the mouth of something far darker. The instant the black tendril brushed against his boot, Chayton felt the world tilt. It was not like touching ice, though the cold was sharp enough to burn. It was deeper, an invasion. The chill didn't stop at his skin. It sank straight into the marrow of his bones, spreading upward through his leg with terrifying speed. His breath hitched, and for the first time in years, his hands shook. He yanked his foot back instinctively, stomping against the earth to shake off whatever clung to him. But there was no residue, no mark. Only the lingering, gnawing cold spiraling through his veins. Chayton's blood ran cold, and not from fear alone. The woman screamed again, though her voice was no longer her own. It split into a dozen tones at once, some high, some guttural, some that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. Her body convulsed as though her bones were bending in ways no body should, her chest arching unnaturally high before crashing back down. The ichor poured from her wound more freely now, tendrils multiplying, writhing like snakes seeking warmth. They spread across the ground in a widening circle, crawling toward him, toward the walls, toward the sunlight above. Each one moved with the surety of a predator that knew its prey could not escape. Chayton took a step back, his breath ragged, his lance gripped so tight his knuckles whitened. His instinct screamed at him to run, but the warrior in him refused. If he fled now, this thing would not stop at the canyon. It would find the open desert, the mountains, the rivers. It would hunt beyond him. The woman's eyes snapped open, and for an instant, they glowed with a pale, unnatural light. Her voice broke through the cacophony, faint but desperate. I tried to hold it. Her head jerked violently to the side, her neck bending at an angle that made Chayton's stomach twist. From her mouth spilled not words but black mist, thick and oily, which coiled upward into the sunlight like smoke. The light dimmed wherever it spread, shadows deepening unnaturally around them. Chayton's heart hammered against his ribs. He had faced rifles, arrows, starvation, storms, but never this. He tightened his stance, planting his feet, holding the lance ready, though a gnawing voice whispered that no weapon of wood or stone would matter. The tendrils reached again, curling along the dirt toward him. This time he struck, driving the spearhead down with all his strength. The point pierced one of the black coils, splitting it in two. For a heartbeat, it writhed, then collapsed into a smear of sludge that hissed and smoked against the earth. But from the woman's thigh, two more surged forth to replace it. Chayton cursed under his breath. His breath clouded in the air, white and heavy, as if winter had fallen upon the canyon in an instant. His fingers went numb on the lance. Every beat of his heart felt slower, colder. He feared if the tendrils reached him again, he might not remain himself. The woman clawed at the dirt, trying to lift her head. Her voice, broken and raw, cut through the shrieking chorus for a moment. "You should have left me." Her words stabbed deeper than the cold ever could. Shame struck him like a hammer. He had thought himself noble, thought himself merciful. But his mercy had torn open a prison he could not close. The ground beneath her began to darken, soil turning black, cracking as though scorched by fire. Yet no heat rose, only more of that dreadful cold, pouring outward in waves. Chayton's vision swam. The shadows around the canyon warped, stretching unnaturally long, curling like fingers reaching down the stone walls. He blinked hard, but the shapes remained. The canyon itself seemed to close in, its silence twisting into something oppressive. Alive, another tendril lashed at him. He swung the lance, striking it aside, but the impact numbed his arms. He staggered back, breath ragged. His courage had never failed him, but now terror coiled in his gut. Not the kind that made a man run, but the kind that hollowed him out from within, that whispered of futility, of death, of endings. Still, he stood. Chayton planted the butt of his lance into the earth, forcing his shaking body to stillness. His chest heaved, but his eyes burned with grim fire. "I am Apache," he growled, more to himself than to the thing spreading before him. "And I do not run." The words steadied him, though his blood still ran cold. Colder than the snows on the highest mountains. The woman's body convulsed once more, then stilled, her lips moving in a final whisper. Chayton strained to hear it over the shrieking chorus that poured from her throat. "It is free," and then her eyes rolled back, her body collapsing like a rag doll. The ichor surged faster, as though her death had opened the last seal. Chayton felt the canyon silence break, not with sound, but with a presence. Something unseen, vast, and ancient, now awake. For the first time in his life, Chayton truly understood what it meant to be powerless. The woman's body lay still, her chest no longer rising, her head tilted back in a grotesque slackness. Whatever had lived within her had claimed the last of her breath. But death did not bring peace to the canyon. It brought the opposite. The ichor no longer bled like a wound. It poured, gushing from her thigh in streams that moved like liquid shadows. It crawled across the dirt, branching outward into veins that spread in every direction. Each tendril twitched and pulsed, hungry, purposeful. The ground where it touched blackened and cracked, the soil brittle as ash. Chayton staggered backward, breath ragged, eyes darting. He had fought men with rifles, men with cannons, men with numbers so great they swallowed the horizon. But this was not a war of men. This was older, a hunger without form. The air thickened, heavy and oppressive. It was no longer silence that surrounded him, it was suffocation. Each breath felt borrowed, like the canyon itself decided whether he would keep it. A bitter stench stung his nostrils, sharp as burnt copper, thick as decay. The woman's lips moved one last time, though her body was lifeless. Chayton saw her dead mouth from words that no breath should carry. It spreads. Her voice did not sound in the air. It sounded in his head, low and final, echoing in the hollow chambers of his skull. His blood iced over, colder than before. The shadows on the canyon wall began to writhe. They bent and curled, twisting unnaturally. The sunlight above seemed to recoil, dimming as though the sky itself feared to touch this place. Chayton's own shadow elongated behind him, stretching, warping, until it seemed less his reflection and more a stranger. The tendrils of black ichor had reached the stones now, climbing the canyon walls in thin, searching fingers. Wherever they spread, rock grew darker, etched with veins of obsidian-like cracks. It was as though the canyon was being rewritten by the curse claimed by it. Chayton's chest heaved. His lance felt suddenly fragile in his grip, just wood, just sharpened stone. He had trusted it all his life to defend him, but now it seemed laughable, a child's toy against the vast hunger uncoiling before him. Still, he stood his ground. Running would mean bringing this curse beyond the canyon. If it spread unchecked, it would reach villages, rivers, fields. It would consume the world he knew. He thought of the old stories told by his grandmother, stories meant to be warnings. Spirits that were not meant to be touched, seals never meant to be broken. He had always dismissed them as cautionary tales, superstition to keep the young from wandering into danger, but this was no story. This was the curse made flesh. The earth beneath the woman cracked with a sudden, deafening snap. The ground split open, fissures racing outward like lightning. From them rose black vapor, thick and twisting, carrying whispers that clawed at his ears. Words he could not understand, languages older than his people, older than stone. Chayton staggered, covering his ears, but the whispers burrowed past flesh and bone. They spoke directly into his mind, pressing images into his thoughts, visions of endless black skies, rivers of tar, faces stretched into screams without end. He gasped, shoving them away, but the images clung like burrs. "This is no fight of men," he muttered under his breath. His voice was hoarse, his throat tight. "This is a fight of spirits." The ichor rose higher, coiling like serpents above the woman's body. For the briefest instant, the mass took shape, something vaguely human, yet not. A towering silhouette with arms too long, head bent at an unnatural angle, eyes that glowed faintly like embers buried deep in ash. Then the shape collapsed, dissolving back into writhing tendrils. But the impression lingered, burned into Chayton's mind. Whatever this curse was, it had form. It had will, and it was no longer bound. The warrior's blood ran colder still, his breath fogging in the sunlight. He knew then what the woman had meant. She had been no victim in the beginning, she had been the prison. Her flesh, her body, had been the vessel that kept this thing chained. And by freeing her, he had freed it. The realization struck like an arrow to the heart. Her plea had not been for herself. It had been for him. For the world, and he had failed her. The canyon trembled again, the cracks widening, black veins stretching outward as far as his eye could see. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, rising into a chorus that seemed to chant in triumph. Chayton lifted his lance. Though his arms were heavy, his soul heavier still. He whispered a prayer in his tongue, not for victory, but for strength. Because he understood now, this was no battle he could win. It was a curse. Unseen, unstoppable. And it had already begun to spread. The canyon was no longer a place of stone and silence. It was alive now, thrumming with the curse he had unleashed. The air shook with whispers, the ground shivered beneath his feet, and the black ichor spread outward in veins that pulsed like arteries. Chayton gripped his lance tighter, But the weapon felt pitiful, an ember of wood against a storm of night. The woman's body had become little more than a husk, a discarded shell. The ichor surged from her wound in endless torrents, crawling across the ground, up the canyon walls, into the sky itself. The sunlight above shrank, dimmed, as though even the day was retreating. And then it struck. A tendril whipped forward, faster than Chayton's eyes could follow. He swung his lance in reflex, the stone tip slicing through the black coil. The thing shrieked, not in air, but in his mind. The sound rattled his skull, set his teeth aching, made his vision blur. Another tendril lashed from the left. He ducked, rolling across the dirt, but the cold brushed his arm, seeping into his flesh. His muscles spasmed, stiffening as if the chill itself sought to bind him. Chayton forced himself upright, chest heaving, his breath thick in the frozen air. His people taught that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Yet this was a fear unlike any he had ever known, vast, ancient, indifferent. A fear that whispered he was nothing but dust beneath its gaze. The tendrils coiled again, weaving together. From their writhing mass rose a shape, taller than any man, towering against the canyon wall. Its form shifted constantly, arms that split into more arms, a face that never settled, eyes that glowed faintly in a dozen places at once. Every heartbeat it changed, yet its presence was steady, crushing, undeniable. Chayton's knees nearly buckled beneath the weight of it. His breath fogged in short, frantic bursts. Still, he raised his lance. He would not kneel. Not while breath still moved in his chest. "Come then," he muttered, his voice raw. "If I freed you, take me first." The shape leaned toward him, its many eyes burning faintly like dying coals. For a moment, the whispers quieted, and in the silence, a single voice pressed into his skull. "Not you." Chayton staggered back. The words had no sound, but he felt them the way one feels cold water down the spine. Not him? The tendrils shifted, coiling away from him, spreading instead along the canyon floor, reaching outward, toward the desert beyond. He realized with horror that he was not its prize. He was nothing. A flicker of resistance, an obstacle to be stepped over. Its hunger was for more, for everything. His chest constricted. He saw, in his mind's eye, the villages scattered across the plains. Children playing by rivers, mothers grinding corn by firelight, warriors patrolling mountain trails. He saw them all swallowed, their cries drowned in the endless chorus he now heard. No. The words scraped his throat raw. He planted his lance into the dirt again, standing firm though his legs shook. "You will not leave this place." The curse did not answer. It did not need to. Its tendrils surged toward the canyon's edge, climbing higher, hungering for the open world. Chayton lunged. He drove his lance deep into the black mass at the canyon floor, the stone tip sinking until the shaft quivered. The ichor hissed, recoiling for a heartbeat, the shriek filling his skull until his vision went white. But the mass did not break. The tendrils split, regrouped, surged again. The warrior ripped the lance free, teeth bared, ready to strike again, but deep inside he knew the truth. His weapon could wound it, delay it, but not stop it. He had made his choice when he ignored the woman's plea, and this unstoppable spreading was the consequence. The blackness surged past him now, crawling up the canyon walls, reaching the sunlight above. Chayton staggered forward, raising his lance again, but the ground split open beneath his feet. A fissure yawned wide, and from it rose another plume of black vapor, thick and choking. He stumbled, nearly falling into the crack, but caught himself on the rim above. The first tendrils breached the canyon rim, spilling onto the desert beyond. Chayton's heart clenched. The curse was free. It would not be bound again. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening chorus, drowning his thoughts, filling his skull with endless voices. He dropped to one knee, lance planted in the earth, his breath ragged, his vision blurring still. He whispered a final prayer in his tongue, not for his life, not even for forgiveness, but for strength to fight until the last, because he knew now there was no undoing what he had unleashed. The curse would spread, and all he could do was stand in its path until it consumed him too. His blood still ran cold, but his spirit burned fierce. If this was his end, then he would face it as Apache, unbowed, unbroken, a warrior to the last breath. The canyon shook. The curse roared, and Chayton charged into the darkness.